This video was produced by
My firm provides federal marketing services and some lobbying work primarily for advanced materials companies, about 80 of them across the country. Some of them are small. They get SBIR awards, or some of them go after big BAAs or FOAs like the offshore wind one as part of partnerships. We also represent about 11 universities across the country, folks like Iowa State, University of Tennessee, UMass. And so we provide them with, when it comes to the renewables area, our focus is primarily on wind and water technologies, as well as geothermal to a lesser extent. On the wind side, we've written a lot of appropriations and authorizing language related to the DOE wind program. Our focus was on trying to make sure there was an offshore wind activity created under the Obama administration, so we worked closely actually with a lot of people in this room on that. We weren't the only ones doing it, but so we wrote all that language. We had lined up congressional support, got our clients mobilized and their representatives as well. We engaged the program, the new leadership during the transition, and so on. Anyway, so we were pretty active in all this stuff, replying to comments, prodding the program, begging the program wherever we could to try and make sure they went forward with a program that benefited our clients to the extent possible. So it's typical shaping the funding opportunities before they were even written is one of the things we do, and we've been pretty successful at it. We've also done stuff behind the scenes on the Hill and with the administration. I testified in the House on some siting issues last year. So we're trying to show value to our clients in a variety of ways any day we can, and we like paying clients and we like them to keep paying us, and so we'll pretty much, if you have a checkbook, you have a representative in Washington is our motto. I'm not kidding. Let's see. So I want to talk a little bit about the DOE budget, which is where the offshore work that a couple of us heard about earlier is located under the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. It's one of like 13 major parts of DOE. It's not the biggest chunk either. Here's what they proposed for FY13. You see all these programs. This is the line in the proposal. So you see, the solar guys proposed a lot. The advanced manufacturing, building technology. So within that, the wind budget request was $95 million. It's actually pretty high for that program. A few years ago, I think it was in the $50–60 million range. But that's pretty high. Here's what they said they're going to do with it. Essentially, they're going to improve components and systems that will be used in offshore energy production, offshore wind energy production. There's a whole range of things that are in that mix. Some of them were actually explained by the program. Some of them they really didn't know. They were going to do a request for information and see what folks on the outside would tell them that they should spend their money on, and then they'd go forward. And this is the last FOA they came out with on the demonstration programs that I think John and the Virginia folks applied to. We had a client up in Maine applied to it. There's, I think, 30 or so. Of those, I'd say maybe 10 might be responsive. And then of those, they have to down select before they do the other down select. So a lot of competition for this money. Some of those proposals will probably fall apart because they don't really have the cost share, or they won't be able to go to get through a contract award. So even if you get a letter saying that we would have selected you but for the funding, hold on to that thing, because that has a lot of value should funding become available. So just and here's what the House and the Senate have said on that 13 request. The Senate went for the full amount, $95 million, spend 30 or 40 million on offshore. That would be an FY13. The House was a little less generous, but still, given the climate in the House, this is remarkable that they said spend $70 million. Some of these other programs in this part of DOE and across the government were zeroed out. Most of the EERE parts were not, but it's not a very good climate to be proposing increases to your budget. They did, and they got away with it with some support at a very hostile House, traditionally a very hostile House. That doesn't mean that someone might support this for a variety of reasons. Usually it's manufacturing jobs or the capital investment in their state, something like that. So very strong support for the offshore idea in general. Now, so I have clients across the supply chain in this, mostly at the front end and the materials, providing things for blades or advanced steels for the drivetrains, anti-lightning strike stuff, storage, all kinds of things like that. And the one thing they ask me all the time is there a market in this wind business? Because they're hearing doom and gloom and the WIA numbers about people that are going to get thrown out of work and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. So their question is there a market? If so, how big is it and when is it going to happen? On the land side, I can answer that. In a worst case scenario, 2,000 megawatts, multiply that by 2 megawatts a stick, multiply that by 3, that's the number of blades that are going to be needed. When it comes to offshore, I have a harder time answering the question. That's why I wanted to come here and hear from folks that are a little closer to it than I am. I assume that given all the activity we see going on, it was described here, that it would indicate to us that there will be an offshore market sometime down the road. I don't know when that's going to be. DOE would like to see something in the water by 2015, 2016. That's what this is aimed at, stimulating that. You see stuff in the queue. We heard from the Dominion guys that they're actually looking at some stuff. So you get the indication that something's going to happen within the next 5, 6, 7 years, or I think is what I'm hearing from folks, which is pretty encouraging. But there's things like the PTC that are, who knows what's going to happen. Most of the incentives, the other incentives, the 1603s, they're gone. I'm not sure they'll ever come back. The cost of this stuff is very, very high, 2.5 times what land-based is. But there's some good stuff going on as well. PTC more than likely will be extended, if not retroactively. It's going to die sooner or later. It's not going to be around. So they got to come up with something in its place or get used to not having it. I think there's going to be continued restrictions on basically fossil fuel generation going forward. I don't see that lightening up anytime soon. It's going to be a big driver. And the state RPSs that Deborah talked about yesterday, clean energy funds, provide a little sort of a floor for how much renewable generation will be installed. But this price thing is huge to me. I consume Dominion's product, and all of my neighbors do. I don't know anyone who wants their bill to go up 2.5 times. I mean, it just won't happen. So, and I engaged the utility industry a lot with Steve Lindenberg when we worked together. Their job is not to affect social change, as far as I understand how they're structured and regulated. It's to do their job, which is keep the lights on, affordable, reliable power. So it's really, I liked the presentation, and I know a lot of people are talking about the utility industry here, but really, if something is 2.5 times more expensive, how could they possibly spend money on that? So we have to work on that through the R&D program. We have to work on it through tax incentives and policies and things like that. But that's a huge issue. In the case of offshore wind, the price is pretty high in the New England area, at least. Down in Virginia, it's not that high. We're lucky to have low prices, but it's much more competitive in the Northeast. We know that, close to major load centers. There's a pretty good resource. Reliability has to be worked out. All the other stuff that goes along with operating anything, and we heard that a couple times from people that know much more about that than I do. I like the idea that components and systems and balance of systems are now being designed for the offshore environment. You're not just taking a wind turbine and slapping some coating on it and expecting it to work for 20 years in an offshore environment or in the Great Lakes with icing. That would have never worked. So there is a lot more investment going into an offshore specifically designed machine. But the key is to get steel in the water, and I don't mean 20 miles offshore. I mean, we got to get something in the near shore area that's going to be worked on, maintained, and we get actual data, baseline information on impacts instead of having to chase around hypothetical studies all the time. The first one to get it in gets the market. I think that's where the manufacturers will realize that somebody in a state or region is very serious about this, and then they'll commit their capital investment. and take a chance of their own with their own boards. I think we do need to determine who's going to pay for this higher priced product and then all of the associating capital investment, because somebody's going to pay for it. And that means we need to know, and we need to decide, as Steve Lindenberg said yesterday, there's a number of ways you can vote. You can vote with your feet, you can vote with your paycheck, you can vote in the political process, but I'd like to know who's going to pay and how much is it and what's my benefit. Just as a ratepayer and a citizen, I have my own views when it comes to renewable energy, but I'm thinking about how do I convince somebody like a neighbor of mine whose salary has not gone up in the last few years that this is a viable thing for them to get behind. This has changed lately. I used this up in New England a couple of months ago, but there were these little efforts going on, even within states, to have offshore wind conferences and have an offshore wind working group, and none of them were talking to each other. They were wasting money and time and splitting resources, and it made no sense to me. So I told them, what you ought to do is stop trying to be unique, get together with the other people around here and join forces, because you can't afford it. I mean, you're going to run out of resources. People can't come to your conferences, and you're not being taken with any seriousness other than you're putting a conference together. And so if you're trying to develop a coordinated political message or a message to the markets, people actually are going to invest in this stuff, get together and get some scale of your own. And so that's not been the issue here. I think John and Deborah and all the other people that started this effort years ago have done a very good job making sure they don't waste time and effort. So there's some of the recommendations I made to not just our clients that have interest in this area, but the other people that do sort of things like what JMU is doing here, do the regional collaborative stuff. The BOEM work is very impressive. I worked in government a long time. I never saw a federal agency try to pull stuff like that together. It's pretty impressive. We really should be working with the oil and gas guys and bringing them into the tent. Number one, they got more money than the wind guys do. They got more infrastructure than the wind guys do, and they got a lot more political access than the wind guys do. So we should be working with them. We should also be working with the emerging marine hydrokinetic industry and make sure that we do things that benefit each other. They're very similar in terms of fluid dynamics. This is obvious, work to make sure that the federal investment there, and I'm not talking about PTC there. The guys that WIA and Sierra did a pretty good job talking about Deborah about the role of PTC. I'm talking about making sure that that $95 million request gets funded fully funded to the extent it can. Too often, and I'm not criticizing my industry friends, they're number one, they have to have one message when they go to the Hill in the administration. Their one message has been for years, give us the PTC, we just need a little bit more. And they could not afford, in my view, to support the federal R&D request. And Steve gave us a presentation about all the stuff that program did. It's not just bending blades until they split in half. There's a lot more activities that go towards doing the market push, market pull, technology development, balance of systems and stuff. We, in the program, when I was there, were often the only ones fighting for this thing. And that's a very lonely place to be. So there needs to, we need to work with all the people in the supply chain to make sure that $95 million is leveraged a lot of different ways. So it's not just 95. It's, it could be 200 million when all the leveraging and other benefits come out of it. It's a lot of money that we don't want to see leave the street. Believe me, Congress would cut that in a heartbeat. They'd cut everything if they could get themselves reelected one more time. So that's their business. We do need to support BOEM's efforts on the and the state efforts on the predictability of a regulatory process. That any uncertainty equals risk, which means money goes to where it's less risky. That's the bottom line. Secure support from the top down and bottom up, and then in the middle. I did have one question for myself as I was listening yesterday and today, and one of my former colleagues said, it's a problem that there's no wind development in Virginia. And I said, really? Why is that a problem? It wasn't defined the right way. It's a problem because there's a potential to lose an opportunity. That's why it's a problem. The fact that there's no wind in and of itself doesn't mean anything, because Dominion can go buy it from the market in PJM. So I think we need to define it a little differently and say we risk losing an opportunity to bring a lot of capital, manufacturing, and jobs to this state and this region if we don't do all these things. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Dan Ancona with Princeton Energy Resources International. Dan is the Vice President for Renewable Energy at Princeton Energy Resources. He's managed renewable and conventional energy projects since 1998. One current project he is working on is a study on mid-Atlantic wind, overcoming the challenges. Before joining Princeton Energy Resources, he served as Wind Energy Program Manager at the U.S. Department of Energy for 20 years and helped to launch that program in 1977. He was chairman of the Virginia State Advisory Board on Air Pollution in 2010, past chairman of the International Energy Agency, Wind Energy Executive Committee, and is an adjunct assistant professor on wind energy business development at St. Francis University. And he also told me to make sure I said that where he's most passionate about wind energy is in sailing, where last year he's logged 4,000 nautical miles just last year. So he knows the wind intimately. Please help me to welcome Dan.
Okay, thank you. You get the beeper? Oh, there it is, right there. Thank you very much. Thank you for staying and hanging in there. I want to add a little bit to what Bill Dougherty was saying. Do make the point that this R&D program that DOE has been doing has been the single piece of continuity through the ups and downs where PTC's been and gone and so forth. So it is important to push that. It is also critically important that you push your local representatives, congressmen, and senators to support the PTC. I've been in this thing long enough to see the carnage that happens when it doesn't get extended, and I've also seen that the support for other energy sources has been solid and continuous, and that's a problem. You know, it's just wrong to be supporting gas and oil delivery and mining and so forth when we're not supporting renewables. So anyway, enough speech. Let me very quickly here introduce our company, Princeton Energy. I joined them after I left DOE 13 years ago. I work on a lot of international projects. The firm actually does more fossil energy work than we do renewable energy work. We're building a 150 megawatt gas turbine project in South America right now. I'm actually presenting today for the results of a study that we've been doing for Department of Energy. I'm going to give you just a piece of the results. The study itself is soon to be released. We have a final draft here. It's actually aimed at addressing the barriers to wind energy development in the Mid-Atlantic region, and I'll give you just a little snapshot picture of some of the results of that. I also want to recognize the other authors, that two of which have already talked here at the conference. Bruce Buckite is a consultant on regulatory and policy issues. He gave a talk yesterday. Dr. Lynn Sparling from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, talked about some of the meteorological things. That's one of the things we looked at as a potential barrier and evaluated that. We also have a young intern here, Rich Bowers, who's sitting here in the front. Rich, right here. If you have questions, you can ask him. He's helping pull this whole thing together, doing a great job. Our senior economist, Kathy George, couldn't be here, but that's just part of the team, and part of the team that relates to this particular report. This particular study has, this is a list of who's involved in it. Of course, we're the program manager for it. We had University of Maryland, Baltimore County. They were supported by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources on a cost-share arrangement. We also had Chesapeake Bay Foundation working with us on the thing, partly to try and understand the issues relating to Chesapeake Bay, although the study itself covered a wider area than that. what we really wanted to do was try and look at some of the issues that you hear about. Wow, the question just came up here a few minutes ago. Why don't we have more wind energy in this area? And in fact, particularly the area from the Mason-Dixon line, meaning Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, down through including North Carolina. And these are some of the myths that you hear about. What I'm going to talk about today really is the particular one that relates to the different market areas, looking at ridgeline versus coastal versus offshore and shallow waters and other possibilities. And I'll share with you the results that we came up with in that particular area. When we started looking at this thing, that market area, we saw that there were probably 4 distinct market areas, each with its own particular issues that might be blocking or barriers. And so those are the particular areas that we're looking at. Let's first talk about the one of the questions was, is there enough area, or are we so populated here that it doesn't make sense to do this stuff? Well, just for comparison, we have on the left the DELMARVA Peninsula, and on the right the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. The Jutland Peninsula is roughly 300 kilometers long. If you look closely, this line, this orange line here, is 300 kilometers long, right down to the German border. From the Mason-Dixon line down to the tip of the Delmarva is about 300 kilometers. On this side, we have about 2,400 megawatts installed and operating, roughly the same population density that we have on the Delmarva. Wind resources are pretty much comparable. And of course, over here, right now, we have no megawatts. The other aspect of this chart is the fact that all the early Danish projects were in shallow, sheltered waters down in this particular area, not exposed to the North Sea. Well, now they ran out of space. That's pretty much built out, so they're building projects on the North Sea side. Very important point. We will talk about that further. The other thing on this side of the pond, we have very large sheltered water, and if you get down to Pimlico and Albemarle Sound, we have huge sheltered water areas that sort of have been overlooked. We'll talk more about that. This is a very quick summary of the NREL data that went into the 20% wind study. It has a tabulation of the wind resource in land-based and offshore. And one of the interesting things when you start looking at that is, I don't know if I can, yeah. They didn't count any area in any of the sheltered waters in those studies. Very important gap. It's not going to be anywhere near the magnitude that you see in these offshore capacities. The potential, resource there is huge, particularly off of North Carolina shore. But there is significant potential in those areas. This is a map off the Department of Interior's cadastre sites that show where the particular lease blocks are located. One of the things I'd like you to do is just visualize that lease block superimposed somewhere, or maybe in pieces over the Chesapeake Bay, or the Delaware site superimposed over some of the hot spots in the Delaware Bay. And I'm not even talking about North Carolina. I mean, that is huge. And the bottom line on this slide to me is that the potential areas in sheltered, shallow waters are huge. Probably as big, if not bigger, than the lease blocks. Okay, our study, the second thing we looked at was economics. This is a map that we pulled off the PJM site, the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland utility site. We picked 4 of their connection node points for modeling on the economics of introducing energy from wind plants in Ridgeline applications, we chose a site that's along the Allegheny Cloverdale site. That's the place where you can inject power into the PJM system. We looked at the costs at that site. We looked at the costs of Calvert Cliffs because that might be a good place to introduce power from bay-mounted sites. And we took the Delmarva Power and Light, ODEC, the Old Dominion Electric Company nodes on the Delmarva Peninsula as a place where you could inject there. Looked at the economics, which are very different at each one of those sites. And then the fourth one is where they're expecting to introduce the power from offshore from the Virginia lease block. And what we did was we looked at what their local energy costs are for each of those sites. The way that PJM actually does it, they have an adjustment factor that relates to the congestion issues associated with moving power out of an area. They're all linked back to what they call the Western Hub. The Western Hub is actually traded on the NYMEX exchange. You can find it listed there. You can't find Cloverdale, but what you can find at PJM is the difference between Western Hub and these other nodes. And so what we did was we looked at those in some detail. I do it the wrong way. Here is the historical congestion bias numbers that PJM publishes. I mean, this isn't something we cooked up. This is off of the PJM site. And what we did was we broke it down seasonally and looked at, the fall through, all the seasons, and took each of the four nodes and then looked at the differential prices. This is the dollars per megawatt hour difference between each of those nodes and the Western Hub. In other words, this is like an adder or a subtractor, and looked at it off-peak and on-peak. And just as an example, if you compare Cloverdale, let me see where I got that. Yeah, if you compare Cloverdale during the summer, very important time, that's when the peak demand is, with the Delmarva Power and Light, you have a $22 per megawatt hour difference in what the power price would be of interjecting that. That's off-peak versus on-peak, but that's a big spread. It makes a big difference whether you're on-peak or off-peak, and it makes a big difference of where you inject power. There's a lot of interesting intricacies in this. Now, what we did was we used this and fed it into some economic models for actual projects. See if I can get that. Okay, the second part of the cost equation, the economics equation, is what should the systems cost? And what I did was I took data, this is out of an NREL report, and then we updated it with additional information that was available from some European sites, and looked at, in detail here, some of the projects that were similarly sized, looking at shallow water versus deep water. And I'm not going to go through each one of them, but just take one of the things we looked at was, projects that were not the little stuff, but the big stuff. If you compare ones that were both in Denmark and roughly the same time frame, but here's one that's, this is distance from shore here, and this is depth of water. This is like double the water depth and almost double the distance. And guess what? It costs 16% more. Not really a big surprise, I guess, when we heard about 30% due to foundations and so forth. But, I mean, there's some real numbers. Now, we did not look at the hypothetical numbers that have been proposed here in the U.S. I'll just leave it at that. We tried to look at what was best available data from real projects that had been commissioned. This is all going to be in the report. We then looked at some of the differences in towers, and I don't want to spend any time. This is actually out of a study that I ran when I was back at Department of Energy back in the late 1970s. We looked at offshore wind energy, and at the time, the conclusion was that it probably cost at least twice as much as land-based stuff. Westinghouse did a very comprehensive study with Global Marine as the subcontractor. The turbine concepts were very different than what's available today, but but it was at the time it was about a $500,000 study. It was a significant piece of work. I mean, today you probably multiply that by 4 to get 4 or 5 to get a value for it. They looked at all the different technologies, and they focused mostly on offshore, out in the deep water, but cataloged a lot of very good wind resource data and a lot of good bathymetric data too. Yeah. All right, going back now to the table that I presented and talked about the differences. I looked at the numbers. I think we saw some of those numbers earlier. A couple of things that I took away from all those European projects were that most of the stuff. This is now looking at distance from shore versus the cost per megawatt. And the first conclusion I saw was, well, first of all, most of the stuff was less than 10 kilometers from shore. Now we're seeing projects that are moving out further from shore, but there's definitely a big cluster here, less than 10 clicks from shore. Now we're talking a lot further than that for our projects here in the U.S., and that's why they're going to be expensive. This is looking at the water depth for European projects. We actually looked at the data, excuse me, and came to the conclusion that there probably are 2 sets of curves here. The early stuff, projects that were in the time frame from 1990 to 2006, you ended up with kind of one curve on those projects, which, by the way, the ones that have names on them were all the shallow water projects. There's a few outliers here that were in deeper water, but that curve was almost flat. And then the things that were put in after that, 2007 on, prices tended to go on up. I think partly driven by the economics of available, materials, cost of copper, that sort of thing. But I think also having to do with risk and water depth and all those things have a big, big factor that people tend to minimize, unfortunately. All right. The next thing we looked at was, well, maybe the wind isn't any good, and so is that a barrier for development in the Mid-Atlantic area? Dr. Sparling did a good presentation on a lot of the real details of things that you should look at. This, to me, is one of the most important parts of it, though. From her data, we're looking here at Eastville wind shear or wind speeds from about 50-meter height up to over 100-meter height. Very steep wind shear. The velocity is actually increasing as you get up. These are average wind speeds. As you get up higher, the velocity is actually increasing. Another tall tower data point. I'm very skeptical of the models, okay? This is measured data, all right? Yeah, if you look at Wallops, they had data up to about 80 meters, but look at the velocity increase as you go up. Kind of what I took away from all the data that we looked at here was that we are probably seriously underestimating the wind resource on the coastal areas. The conclusion we came to is it could be off by a full wind power class. Partly because people don't, I think, properly account for this wind shear, partly because there's no measurements. The tallest measurement we could find was this thing at Eastville at 105 meters. That's barely hub height on the modern turbines. We really, really, really need more data at taller towers. The second part of this wind resource stuff is what we find offshore. Now, one of the things that Dr. Sparling is very familiar with is from her environmental studies are the effects of low-level jets. This is a map of the jets actually from a modeled exercise on a particular day. If you look up here at the top, This is the date. This was run on August 3rd in 2007 using a particular model here at a height of 312 meters. Again, it was mostly aimed at environmental studies. Dr. Sparling has some detailed stuff that's going to be in the report that'll speak to this a little bit more. There's very sketchy data on this. There weren't a whole lot of measurements, although I will say that they did validate these things. There were balloon releases and there were measurements done with wind. I can't remember the name of one of the NOAA wind measurement devices that they calibrated the model. This is not just theoretical stuff. It was validated. It was aimed mostly at air pollution evaluations. But I looked at that and I said, "Wow, there's a hot spot right over the Mid-Atlantic region, and it probably doesn't go that far offshore because of the shape of the terrain here. Maybe it goes partway offshore, but anyway, it looks like it's a phenomena that's driven partly by the mountains versus the coastal temperature differences and that sort of thing. I think, again, this is uncertainty, but probably moves things in the right direction for wind energy. Uncertainty ends up to cost you money, though. All right. All these things, the wind resource, the cost of towers, the cost of going offshore, factored into economic models. These are the results. It's shown two different ways, both as a nominal dollar and a constant dollar. You need to get the report to really see that. This is my last slide. My thought is that this whole offshore thing is a huge potential resource. It is also got a lot of challenges associated with it. Thank you.
Our next and last speaker is Erin Trager with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. There, she is a project coordinator in the Office of Renewable Energy Programs. She has supported BOEM, it's the acronym, through the development and early implementation of the Bureau's regulatory framework for renewable energy leasing on the Outer Continental Shelf. Before joining BOEM, Ms. Trager spent several years in the private sector supporting the development and administration of a national energy efficiency program for products and new homes. Undergraduate degree is a BS in Integrated Science and Technology, JMU. She is currently the project coordinator for Delaware, Virginia, and South Carolina, where she is responsible for managing the Bureau's intergovernmental task forces in the planning, leasing, and oversight of offshore wind projects proposed on the OCS off the states. And I can say that as an offshore developer, have interfaced with Erin quite a bit, this is one very busy gal. Please help me to welcome Erin.
So basically what I'm here today to do is to give you a quick update on what we've been doing with our program in the Mid-Atlantic, specifically with Virginia. And I know we've been very active in the last few months on a lot of fronts. So if there's anything I can't delve into in too much detail, obviously feel free to contact me anytime. I'm happy to follow up with you. So I'll give you a quick background. Look at our neighboring states. So we'll look at what we've been doing with Maryland and Delaware, and then look south to North Carolina, give you a quick update on that. And then look specifically at what we've been doing with Virginia, and then what are we doing in the months ahead. So program background. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, we're a bureau in the Department of Interior. We're one of many bureaus. Our sister bureaus include Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Indian Affairs and National Park Service. And what our role is to oversee the development of the nation's offshore energy resources. So primarily, what our name used to be was Minerals Management Service, and what we regulate oil and gas development in the Gulf of Mexico and off California. And we received authority to do renewable energy in 2005. So we rolled out our regulations in 2009. and have been working very steadily to begin issuing leases for renewable energy. The types of activities that are covered by our program include wind, wave, ocean current, and transmission that would support those types of energy. And of course, there may be other renewable forms that may surface in the future, such as floating solar. But right now, these are the primary, the ones that we oversee. And I won't go into detail on these, but basically what this gives you is a snapshot of the types of projects we've been looking at and the types of proposals we've received. For wind, there's a lot of interest on the Atlantic, obviously. Primarily from Maine down to North Carolina, we've received proposals, but we do know there's quite a bit of interest in South Carolina and Georgia as well. So our regulatory framework, suffice to say, we oversee projects from cradle to grave. And so what that means is we look at from the time of lease issuance all the way down to decommissioning or removal of the wind turbines. And coordination up at the top there is one of our very emphasized elements in our regulations. It's throughout the rule. And we've created a mechanism to do this the most effectively that we feel we can. And those are the task forces, which I'll talk about in a second. I won't go into these, but our regulations are now at 30 CFR 585. They used to be 285. But with our organization's reorganization, they did change their number, so 585 is the number now. So intergovernmental task forces, EPACT, both EPACT and then our regulations mandate us to coordinate with state and local governments with any regulation or any leases that we issue. So the mechanism we found to be the most helpful in this regard is setting up these state task forces. We have task forces in nearly every state on the Atlantic, except, of course, Georgia. I don't believe we have one there yet, or New Hampshire. But this has been an excellent way to coordinate. What we do is we bring every government agency to the same table to receive the same information at the same time and to exchange information throughout the leasing process. So we have federal, state, tribal, and local governments at our table. And we most recently had our meeting in Norfolk on June 5th for Virginia. So it is a very, what I found to be a very useful vehicle for exchanging information, excuse me. Smart from the Start, it was alluded to in the last session. Smart from the Start is an initiative that Secretary Salazar announced back in November 2010. And what it is it's an initiative to help streamline our regulatory process. And it does so in a number of ways, primarily, however, that we've seen to date is by streamlining our National Environmental Policy Act compliance review, so our NEPA review. And what we do is we've broken it down, our review down to looking at the environmental impacts of lease issuance and site assessment, and then construction and operations. And so what that's allowed us to do actually is to look at impacts from lease issuance for the Mid-Atlantic and combine that review for 4 states. And that wrapped up in February. The results went out, and we feel it's been certainly an effective way to do that type of environmental review, and without any loss in quality. And there are other components to Smart from the Start, such as making sure that we continue to move forward in reviewing transmission proposals on a parallel track to these wind proposals, making sure that one does not rely on the other, but instead we move forward on both. And really, I think that's the gist of Smart from the Start. Progress to date, we have been quite busy. We've identified 6 wind energy areas, something I didn't mention in the last slide. One of the elements of Smart from the Start is identifying areas that could be suitable for wind energy development by looking at where are the major conflicts or existing uses and trying to identify areas that avoid those conflicts. And so we've identified 6 of those so far in the states listed there. And we've completed that Mid-Atlantic EA that I mentioned, the environmental assessment. And we've also looked at designing an auction format for, to use for multiple states, using our we went out with a notice that Guy mentioned a moment ago, the auction information request, and so that went out several months ago, and we've been able to move forward on that. And then also negotiating, we're going to be negotiating shortly a non-competitive lease off the Delaware wind energy area, in the Delaware wind energy area. And we're actually working with North Carolina to identify potential wind energy areas. So taking a quick look at our neighboring states, rather than looking at every state, that would take all day. But I thought it might be helpful to look at Delaware, Maryland, and North Carolina, just to give a sense of what we're doing real fast. For Delaware, we've moved through that process. That was actually the first state where we established a task force. That was back in October 2009. And we issued 2 notices since that time to determine competitive interest, one of which was a request for interest, and the next one was a request for competitive interest. And we only received 1 valid nomination of interest, and that was from a company called Blue Water Wind Delaware, LLC. And so we issued a determination of no competitive interest in April of last year, and we're now currently developing our lease package, and that package is based on the mitigation measures proposed in the Mid-Atlantic EA and other stipulations that were derived from consultations with agencies such as DOD. So we are moving forward with that and should be moving into that negotiation fairly shortly. For Maryland, we started with a request for interest in that state and determined there was quite a bit of interest in that area. So we published a call for information and nominations in February of this year, and more companies came into that. And so where we are now with that state is we know it's competitive, so we need to proceed down the competitive path and move toward an auction. And so that lease sale, the first step in moving in that direction would be a proposed sale notice. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment about Virginia, but that is the next step for Maryland. And we're looking at what area specifically might go in that proposed sale notice and whether it be split in 2 or any kind of new configuration that might be necessary. For North Carolina has had quite a few complexities similar to Virginia since we've begun looking at areas off that state. We had our last task force meeting in fall of 2011, and there are 5 areas that have been identified all along the coast, and I don't have a map right here. I will in a moment, but there are areas, and some of those areas are off of Park Service property. And with understandable concern, the Park Service is worried about the impact of an industrial complex near Park Service properties, such as the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse and Cape Lookout Lighthouse. So they said, well, we would like to see a simulation of what a wind facility could look like off these properties. And so we've partnered with them to do a study. And that study is underway right now. 18 sites have been selected. It's a visualization study. And so the contractor has looked at 18 sites, looking at 2 different types of turbines, a 3.6 megawatt and I believe a 7 megawatt to look at what could happen down the road. And looking at 200 turbines, a set size project, looking at what the impact of that could be at 10 nautical miles, 15 nautical miles, and 20 nautical miles. And so some of those images just came back last week. We've been looking through them with the Park Service, and we should be looking at having this visualization study go out at the end of July in the public realm. So that'll help inform the identification of areas off North Carolina moving forward. Another big concern that some of you are aware of is also vessel traffic. This was a big concern off Virginia as well. And off North Carolina, there's quite a bit of vessel traffic. And so we've been working with the Coast Guard, and we've been doing our own outreach at BOEM with the maritime community and looking at the data that we have on vessel traffic, looking at the level of incidences that could happen. For instance, looking at all the data from 2009, how many times do vessels come within 1 nautical mile of each other? So that's the type of analysis we're doing now to get a better handle on the level of risk that there could be if a wind facility were installed in certain locations, what that would do to vessel traffic. So working on those 2 fronts, we should be having a task force meeting in July. That's the current estimate, and we'll be developing notices in the future after those studies are complete. And this is a map just showing you the wind energy areas that we have. The ones off North Carolina are not technically wind energy areas yet, but you can see that these are some of the areas up and down the coast that we've identified to date. So regarding Virginia specifically, Virginia was one of the 3 that was established back in 2009 in terms of a task force. We had our first meeting in December of that year. We've had 6 meetings since that time, 4 of which have been in person, 2 on a webinar, and quite a lot of existing uses off the state. So the task force member input has really been vital in narrowing down the area to potentially suitable areas for wind. And a lot of the uses were identified early on, such as military uses. There's a large training site off Norfolk, and also NASA, of course, Wallops Island has their facility. We were able to avoid their fallout zone. We also avoided ecologically sensitive habitat along the North Barrier Islands. And most recently, the biggest concern was vessel traffic, and that came to light late spring of last year. And we had a sit down with a number of maritime stakeholders, Virginia Maritime Association, the Port Authority, Army Corps, Coast Guard, to kind of to hash out what some of the concerns were, look at the data, and start really trying to find an area that could be suitable for wind. And you know, after that meeting, we were able to go back, do additional analysis, had additional input from a stakeholder group, the American Waterways Operators, and we met in August of 2011 last year, and sat down and looked at a proposed new configuration for the wind energy area that would help avoid some of that vessel traffic. And so that was the area that eventually made it into the Virginia Call for Information and Nominations. Just to show you a snapshot of the evolution of the planning, this doesn't show every configuration that we went through, but you can kind of get a sense of where we've been and where we're going. That big orange blob is a dredge disposal area that the Army Corps is responsible for, and the green area in the 2010 picture is the wind energy area in its early days. And you can see that we've made it to February. We can see we've avoided some of that concern about vessel traffic. And you can see here that pink, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, that pink area there is actually the designated traffic separation scheme moving out of the Chesapeake Bay. And so the big concern really was very deep draft vessels coming out of Chesapeake Bay and going north. And if you look at AIS data, which is vessel traffic data, which I don't have with me, you can see that traffic moves throughout that wind energy area. So really trying to find a workable solution was important. And you can see that we've moved the wind energy area to the east to accommodate more vessel traffic. And that is about 24 nautical miles offshore at its closest point. So the Call for Information Nominations was published in February, along with a number of other important documents, including the results of the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Assessment, the Maryland Call, and the final commercial lease form that we'll be using for issuing a number of leases in the future. The comment period deadline closed in mid-March, and we received 8 commercial nominations of interest. And we also received 8 comment submissions to help inform our review moving down the road. We've completed our legal qualifications of all the applicants, and we still are working on technical and financial, although that's not going to hold us up. Given the level of interest, we know it is competitive, so we are moving down the competitive track. We're not going to wait for the qualifications to be completely wrapped up before we move forward. And so the next step really in the competitive scenario is to publish a proposed sale notice. And what this does is it lays out the proposed terms and conditions of a lease document, and including the auction details and the fiscal terms. And that was a draft document that we actually discussed with the task force on June 5th to try to get their input. And we have received quite a bit of very useful input that we're looking at and refining that document. And when it does publish, the proposed sale notice will have a 60-day comment period with it. So organizations, including companies, can comment on those terms and conditions. So these are the companies that responded to the call. I'll try to wrap up quickly here. I won't go into detail, but you can see that 3 of them nominated the entire call area, and then you have 5 that nominated portions. You can see the density map here showing the red area is the area of the highest level of interest, which is closest to shore, which is not a surprise, and followed by orange and yellow. On a parallel track, we're also looking at a research lease request. We did receive a lease request from the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. It was a revision from an earlier application. We received this in early June, and we're going to look at this in the months ahead. Basically, it's for 2 meteorological towers in those blue aliquots that you see circled. An aliquot is a 16th of an OCS block. So the next step for us is to do a completeness review, which is underway. We did determine based on responses to the call for information and nominations, that this type of use of the area would be compatible with commercial wind. So in theory, you can issue 2 leases on top of each other, a commercial and a research, and we have confirmed it's compatible, at least initially. So that allows us to move forward with a notice. And so what we'll likely do, which I'll tell you in a moment, is publish a notice in the coming months. Another project that we're looking at, project proposal, is the Atlantic Wind Connection. You heard a little bit about that in the last session. It's a regional offshore grid. I won't go into too much detail on this, but basically it stretches down from the northern edge of New Jersey down to Virginia. And we determined no competitive interest on that proposal. And the next step for us will be to consider it in a environmental impact framework. So we'll be doing our environmental analysis on that proposal. And as far as Virginia goes, you can see here's a close-up of where that offshore grid would interact with the wind energy area in its current form. So you can see it's basically two parallel cables that move up the coast and make landfall at various points. So next steps for Virginia. For commercial leasing, we're going to be wrapping up our qualifications, doing that technical and financial review that we do. We'll be refining that proposed sale notice and putting that in the Federal Register. And that'll have a 60-day public comment period. And based on those comments that we receive, I do encourage you to comment. We will develop the final sale notice, and that will lay out the final terms and conditions for the lease and the fiscal terms, and the auction format and such. And that final sale notice has to be published at least 30 days in advance of a lease sale. We'll then hold our lease sale, which will be electronic, very likely, and it'll be a single lot. Well, what we're proposing is a single lot ascending clock auction, which would be putting out the full WEA in a single lot and having that be competed on. But again, that's in development, so it may change before the proposed sale notice, but very likely that's what we're leaning toward doing. The research lease request, we would issue a notice. That notice very likely would take the form of a notice of a proposed lease area and request for competitive interest. And if it's non-competitive, we would issue a determination of no competitive interest. And then we would enter into a memorandum of agreement with the state. And that's spelled out in our regulations in section 238. Basically, it's a special type of lease that is set up for federal agencies and state agencies in order to conduct research. And it waives many of the fees that a commercial developer would have to face. So that would be the next step for that. And then a plan would be submitted, and we would review that plan, specifying details on how those MET towers might be installed. So my colleague Casey, unfortunately, was unable to join me here today. He's the project coordinator for the research lease and then also for Atlantic Wind Connection project proposal. So, but if you have questions about that, feel free to contact me or him after this meeting, and we're happy to help you out. All right, thank you.
Okay, first question is for Dan. You provided some great info on why the shallow water in the Delmarva areas look interesting. what are the biggest obstacles other than cost, and how do these compare to Jutland? Dan?
I would say probably the second one that I would, besides cost, would be the uncertainties associated with both the wind resource, whether it's there. I'm quite confident it is, but I can't prove that. And certainly you couldn't prove that to a financial organization. Second of all, the uncertainties about environmental issues. And I think my gut feel is that if it's handled properly, can be overcome. I think the University of Delaware has done some exceptional job of trying to calm the waters, pun intended, in the Delaware area by getting factual information into the hands of the various stakeholder groups. And the surveys that they've done have shown that there's strong support for doing projects. I think you have to be very careful to pick your locations so that they're not in areas that would be red flags. Avoid the areas where you would have flyways and that sort of thing. Avoid the environmental issues, but with proper information about the benefits of reducing pollution in the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay, from reducing coal-fired emissions and the devastating effects on the environment from the mountaintop removal mining, and also that goes for uranium mining up in Virginia that's being proposed. I think balancing those environmental issues, I think in a factual way, would help.
Great, thank you. And there was another question here about regulatory barriers to developing in shallow areas, but I think you've addressed that in your response. Question for Erin. You said that you're leaning towards selling a single lease. I think you referred this to a lot for the entire Virginia wind energy area. Can you tell us a bit about why the agency is leaning that direction?
In response to a notice that we published about auction formats that are under consideration, it's called the Auction Format Information Request. We received feedback that expressed support for auctioning off the Virginia lease area in a single lot, and it does seem in that configuration it would certainly make sense. It is viable for a very large commercial development. And knowing that there would be micrositing involved with various perhaps shipwrecks and whatnot having to move around within the area, it would make sense to put it out in a single lot. We're not opposed to doing it in 2 lots though, and that is something we posed to the task force membership is would putting it in 2 lots make more sense, and we did receive some feedback on that we're considering. So for right now we're looking at a single lot, but That was an open question also. You could do 3 or 4. Yeah. The more you break it, the difficulty is the more you break it down, the more potential there is for buffer concerns, wind shadowing effects and such. So I know for some states that we're considering multiple lots right now, you have to look at how large of a buffer do you need to build in for that purpose, and it takes consideration. So right now we're looking at 1. Oh, darn.
The question is, can you discuss whether or not a multifactorial approach to the selection process will be used for Virginia? And if so, will the multifactorial approach be the same for other states, or do you see this as varying from state to state? And how do you see that playing out? Maybe just take 15 seconds to explain what, for those in the audience who might not understand what multifactorial approach is.
Sure. A multi-factor approach to an auction is one that takes into account subjective factors. So it would be similar to looking at the quality, or for instance, other selling points to a project other than cost. So right now, the simplest and cleanest way, obviously, is to base it wholly on money. You would, for instance, a ascending clock auction, you would look at the bids that are offered for an area, and the highest bid wins. And so that is the cleanest. Doing a multi-factor can sometimes open you up to liability. The more subjective it is, the more potentially risky it is. In our preamble to our regulations, we did propose multi-factor was under consideration for certain states that had gone out ahead of our regulations. That included Rhode Island, Delaware. No, actually, well, Delaware is non-competitive now, but New Jersey. And what it proposed doing was looking at other factors, such as what incentives the state had put into play and weighing those. And for Virginia, certainly the Secretary is open to using multi-factor, but it's not something that we would lean towards doing unless there was a really good reason to do so. Some states have put incentives into place, such as Rhode Island had its cooperative agreement that it had done years ago, and New Jersey had a Met Tower reimbursement program. So these were things that they had done before our regulations went into place to try to identify developers. And in Virginia, we don't have exactly those types of incentives that have gone into play. So. Okay,
just so that's all the questions from the audience, and I do have some other questions, just so PJ doesn't feel left out here. PJ, do you believe we'll see a willingness by Congress, particularly in the House side, to begin moving renewable energy-related legislation and policies forward, particularly the PTC, once the election is over? How would you read the tea leaves there?
That's the general hope.
I guess I have to pull out my checkbook to get a longer answer. Okay. No. Okay, tough guy. Okay. All right, here's another one for you, PJ. I'm not going to let you off that easy. You mentioned in your presentation that one of the recommendations is for folks in the renewable industry to, try to find opportunities to work with folks in the oil and gas industry to advance some of the policies that would be beneficial to us. Have you heard of folks in your work in Washington in the oil and gas industry who have expressed an interest in working with wind or solar people on energy policy? And if so, does your firm sort of help with that? Do they help play a matchmaking role for this kind of instances?
The last part of that question is absolutely we can help people. but I think there are some folks in the oil and gas exploration, production industry that could be good partners for the wind folks, particularly when it comes to designs of the platforms and floating devices, maintaining and operating these things, plus they have all the little ships to do the construction and operation and maintenance of the wind system. So there's some natural partnerships there. The other thing is that we looked at this a couple of years ago, to decommission an oil and gas platform, it's probably $250 million or something like that. So if there's any way that we could help marry the oil and gas platform owner with potentially a generation site so that they don't have to do it this year or 2 years and spend all that money, that may be something worth looking at. But there's a lot more connections than I think there are differences.
Maybe just one more question I have here for Erin. You talked about the visualization study that's underway in North Carolina, and the Park Service and BOEM is sort of working together to look at that charge. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that'll be used to determine whether 10, 15, or 20 nautical miles will be acceptable? I mean, will folks within those two branches say, look at the visualizations and say, that's not right, or will they kind of put it out to the public? I mean, a lot of these things are sort of, beauty is an eye to the beholder. How will they, look at this information and make decisions about what is acceptable?
The answer would be carefully. The Park Service is a bureau within the Department of Interior, so they are our sister bureau, and what will likely happen is when the results come in at the end of July, we'll have discussion with them. They'll have to put their heads together and decide what kind of comment they want to provide to us on the area and whether or not they feel comfortable with it being within a certain distance from their properties, and we'll have to weigh that very carefully. The ultimate authority is for the secretary. I'm designating the WPA, so we do have 5 areas. They're not all associated. They're not all impacted by Park Service property, so we may be able to move forward. Even if we can't move forward with certain areas because of that concern, we certainly can look at how we can move forward in other areas, but we're not at that point yet.
But just to be clear, sort of the decision as to whether or not 10 miles is appropriate, 15 or 20, it really is going to be within a few key people within the Park Service will sort of make those comments to the to BOEM. Yeah.
Yeah, the meeting we had last week was we had the superintendents for the 2 national seashores, and we are in close dialogue with them on the information we're getting. So they are very concerned about not only just the view shed during the day, but also at nighttime, any kind of light pollution. So we're going to have to look at their concerns carefully.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance and your participation. And if you could please help me give it a warm round of applause.